traveled as much. So when I asked them, what do you think is the biggest Arab country in terms of population, immediately they say Saudi Arabia. Because of the political significance of Saudi Arabia in terms of alliances with the US. And we can talk, I mean, not for this lecture, but we can also talk about the petrodollar system at some point. Okay, so again, Arab identity is diverse, is multifaceted, it's not monolithic. It encompasses a wide range of culture, ethnic, racial, religious, regional differences shaped by the diverse histories and experiences of our region. Even the language and religion are very diverse, way more diverse than we think. When we think about the Arab world, immediately we think Islam. But no, there are a lot of other religions. Even within Islam, there are a lot of different practices within Islam and a diversity of ways that people blend their ethnic and kind of pre-Abrahamic religions with Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. So Arabic language and Islam are central, of course, but they're not the only ones. We have significant religious and linguistic diversity with Christians, other minority communities contributing to the cultural fabric of the region. So one of my main objectives of today is to kind of destabilize this binary that we think of when we say East and West, right? We tend to think about the East as something very separate, at least culturally, from the West. This is actually not true historically, right? The region has been included in the Western tradition for so long. he kind of roamed freely and scientific inquiry was embedded in the culture. So Ibn al-Haytham is the father of modern optics. He wrote a book called Kitab al-Manazir, which is basically the reason that we now understand light, vision, and refraction. So he pioneered optical tools like the camera obscura. The reason you have a camera on your phone is that men. The shared continuity between history, we know that all of this nationalism stuff is really not very accurate. By the way, Ibn Haytham he influenced Renaissance figures like Galileo and Newton. They actually referenced him in their books. Al-Khwarizmi, anyone? Okay, do you know what? Okay, so he is known to be, was born in Khwarizm, this is where he comes from, and he died in Baghdad. He was known as the father of algebra. He wrote الكتاب المختصر في الحساب الجبر والمقابلة. Al-Jabr is the word where algebra comes from. He also introduced really the Hindu-Arabic numerals that you guys use, like the 1, 2, 3 in English. That's actually Hindu-Arabic numerals, not Latin numerals. I don't know if anyone knows that. He also developed early algorithms, which is, by algorithms I mean step-by-step procedures for calculations, right? So Al-Khwarizmi is where algorithm comes from, the word. It's from his name, right? And again, like, if you even ask someone who is actively developing algorithms, he would not know who is Al-Khwarizmi, right? Okay. Ibn Sina, as well, definitely known as the father of modern medicine. He kind of bridged Aristotelian philosophy with Islamic thought, shaped medieval European scholasticism. He wrote Al-Qanun fil Tibb, which the word canon comes from Al-Qanun, or the laws. I mean, in academia, we use that word a lot just to say, oh, this is the canon that we should read. These are the things that are like the highest level of literature that we should abide by. And the word canon comes from his book, Qanun al-Tibb. So he was really the first to identify contagious diseases. In the medieval time, it was basically, oh, you're sick, we have to pray for you, and then, I don't know, give you some wine or something. They didn't have the understanding that you can get the disease from something else, that it can be contagious. And he kind of put that relation forward. I'm sure he's not the first person who did that, but he was kind of the one who coined it and wrote about it. So he linked illnesses to soil and water and systemized anatomy, pediatrics, and gynecology as well. He also advanced classification of mental illness. So he had mental illness classifications in 1980 CE, 980, sorry. And he made key contributions to astronomy, physics, and theories of light and motion as well. Finally, my favorite one, Ibn Khaldun. He's definitely one of my advisors, or something he doesn't know about it, but he is the father of social sciences. Before Ibn Khaldun, we did not know what social sciences were. We did not think of history in terms of why this happened. We just thought, what happened? And we wrote down what happened, right? I mean, starting classical antiquity, where history became something of a science that we actually cared about accuracy. Before that, ancient people wrote history in terms of stories and legends. That's why we get all of these like biblical and Quranic stories that are kind of sounds like riddles a little bit, or even like ancient Egyptians mythology, Mesopotamian mythology. They sound like riddles because ancient people did not write down history the way we write it right now. They write it down in the language of mythology and stories to convey a morale of the story. They really didn't care about what actually happened. They cared to convey the morale of the story, right? But Ibn Khaldun was one of the people who said like, okay, we have to study history by asking why things happen, not just what happened, right? So he wrote a Muqaddimah. I encourage you all, this is a great book, honestly. It is, it's a foundational text for political sociology, for political anthropology. There is also a YouTube channel by the same name, and this guy does a great job in kind of reading through Al-Muqaddimah, because it is a dense text, and he explains it in English, so if you want to know more about that. But the thing that really kind of put Ibn Khaldun on the map is his theory of social cohesion. So he was thinking about what makes a civilization last, and what makes a civilization fall. And his answer was social cohesion. Right, that was, I don't know, we knew that in 1332. I don't know why we forgot about it, but so we lost 1,000 years of knowledge for no good reason. But he said that the make it or break it for civilization is how well people are connected to each other. Or in Arabic, he called it al-asabiyya, like this idea of allegiance, of unity together to a community. It doesn't have to be nationalism, or it doesn't have to be like a biological identity, but just feeling of belonging around people who live on the same land and how connected they are to each other. And he thought this was the measure for civilizations. So I'll give you 1 minute. This is Al-Muqaddimah. This is from the actual book, his handwritten. And I'll give you a little bit to read this quote, and then we can talk about. What is he talking about? Evolution in 1377, 600 years before we know even who Darwin is. Within Islamic thought as well, like he was doing that within the Islamic framework, which really expands our idea of what Islamic or Muslim civilization was about. It was not just about Islam at all. It was also about critical thinking. It was about thinking of ways to navigate having faith and also having a critical mind, right? How do we account for these things? And this is the type of scientific and academic freedom they had in 1377, which we don't have right now. So the myth of clash of civilization has been used and overused to justify horrible things in our world. That's why I make it a point in my teaching to destabilize this binary, to destabilize this Bernard Lewis thesis of the clash of civilization, looking at the East and the West as contradictory, the West as the enlightened, rational, progressive people, and the Easterns are the primitive, the savages. They don't have any, they did not really contribute to humanity and civilization. But if we really look through history, we know this is a lie. And we see the same myth being perpetuated right now by the Israeli government to justify what's happening of ethnic cleansing against Palestinians. Because we kind of like look at Arabs and Palestinians as just, as was said by Benjamin Netanyahu, just human animals, or I'm not sure who said that, but someone from the government. Just dismissing Arabs and their entire diverse history and culture to just people who are primitive and savages is the reason our world is where it is right now. Any questions so far? Am I going fast? Is it okay? All right. So I'm going to start by placing my conversation about the colonial history in understanding the philosophies that informed the motivations of Europeans to colonize our land. But let me start by making a very important differentiation between nationalism and patriotism. Have we thought about that before? Okay. So my definition of nationalism is strong allegiance to one's nation, often asserting superiority, often based on shared ethnicity, religion, language, or history. Patriotism is more of love and devotion to one's country and for everyone sharing the same geographical territory, with a focus on shared values of equality and communal prosperity. So here we kind of like look at national dominance, exclusivity, we are better than you type of situation. Patriotism is about unity, equality, shared values, inclusivity. So I don't want us to, like, when I kind of start critiquing nationalism as a theory emerging from the French Revolution specifically, I don't want you to kind of be confused about what I'm talking about. Nationalism is a specific political school of thought that emerged with the French Revolution specifically, but patriotism is a much bigger context like that, than that. Patriotism is about being connected to the people that live around you. Doesn't matter where they come from or their ethnicity or their religion or whatever. So yeah, we don't have to go a lot about that. Okay. Yeah.
So are you putting it in the context of nationalism is a more, is a better concept and patriotism is a better one?
That, from my standpoint, yes.
And isn't patriotism like based on patriarchy and?
Oh, yeah, I mean, now in the American sense, I agree, but in the scientific, how we use it in political science and political sociology and anthropology, nationalism is specific political thought. Patriotism is an attitude for people around you. So it is about living among people rather than living among your nation. So the idea of nation is where we're like kind of destabilizing here, that when you're patriotic, you don't have to be loyal to a specific nation or a specific ethnicity or a specific language group. You are loyal to people living around you. This is the social sciences understanding of the world. Yeah. Let me, okay. So again, let's reiterate on nationalism. It's a belief that a nation's culture and identity and interest should come first. And this is the main problem with nationalism, is that it has this supremacy claim embedded within it, right? My nation is better than your nation. It often linked to power, pride, and expanding territory. Primordialism is the idea that nations are ancient and naturally tied by blood, language, and culture. Which is, of course, not true. European nationalists used this to claim they were superior and had a historic duty to civilize others. Right? This is kind of like the main logic running through the European colonial project. We're here to civilize you. Right? Because y'all are not civilized, so we're here to advance you, and you need to be thankful. That was like kind of the claim. So European powers used nationalist and primordial beliefs to justify empire building in Africa and the airborne. Colonization was framed as civilization mission, not exploitation.
Question here.
Yes.
So with the whole colonial framework, do you feel that the reason for them dividing countries was to take them away from the patriotism and the unity and to make them independent and then kind of fight each other rather than look at each other as a community?
Yes, I mean, I think the goal was extraction of resources, and for you to do that, you have to be able to basically divide and conquer. That was the main logic of the colonial power. We're going to go into your land, we're going to kind of, there's a whole process that a lot of people have wrote about it, which is turning people into colonial subjects. And especially in the Arab world, we did not have a modern state. Modern state or a nation state is a European invention coming out of the French Revolution. So when they came to our region, we had a different type of state, and the state did not really have a nationality. So the state would just serve people on this land. It's as simple as that. But they came and changed that. They mapped the region. They said, these are the borders, right? You are now an Egyptian. You cannot go to Syria because there's a border now. Like they changed the entire governance structure of the region to facilitate extraction of resources. So this was the main objective, is extraction of resources, and the other strategies was just to facilitate that. Does that make sense?
But also to divide.
Yeah, but I'm saying dividing the people was a strategy used to facilitate extraction of resources. I see other hands. Go ahead.
You had told about the concept of philosophy of the unified world.
Yes.
What is similar concept? Is it nationalism or patriotism?
No, social cohesion was not really about a nationalism or an ethnicity, because as I said, like Ibn Khaldun and other Arab and Muslim scholars really traveled across the region with little to no regard where they were born or where their parents came from. So the idea was about people living in one territory, having a sense of belonging to each other.
Is it patriotism?
Huh?
Is it patriotism?
Is it patriotism?
Patriotism?
Patriotism, I don't know, I wouldn't, he did not call it that. But I mean, again, in the social sciences understanding of patriotism, yes, I mean, patriotism has also its issues, like there's nothing better or worse, but in the context of explaining nationalism, I would say that patriotism would be closer than nationalism. Any?
Mine was just a comment, actually, or maybe a question for me today. I read a book called Africa's Not a Country.
Yeah.
It talks about the early conquerors, how they came in border-wise, and I was going to say, was that the same thing?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the scramble over Africa right now, actually. It's coming up. Any other questions? Go ahead. Sorry, you go ahead and then come. Yeah. Yeah.
But based on this, then, I mean, would you say there's more of a community within an empire? Or is everybody saying, like, we are all part of the same empire, then there's kind of like more of a community than in formation of, like, modern nation states, where it's like, you know, the in-group and the out-group, like, you're part of this nation, or you're not part of this nation.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna, like, you know, you're with us or against us, that kind of mentality.
Yes.
But in an empire, like, you're all bound regardless of what ethnicity you are. For example, like, the Roman Empire, we're all Roman. It doesn't matter if you're originally, like, Syrian, or Arab, or Greek, or whatever, like, we're all Roman now. And that's just an idea of that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the empire is the right notion. I mean, this is what we have, but also not every empire is the same. The way, for example, the British Empire was very different from the Arab Empire. The Arab Empire was much more loosely governed, right? It was just like, oh, you pay us taxes, and when we need you in the army, you come here. But they kind of like let local governors be there, like they respected the differences and stuff like that. It was still imperial, but it was a much less weaker grip on local governance, very different from the British. The British were not even there to kind of homogenize people into their empire, they were just there to extract. I'm sorry, you go ahead and then.
I wanted to know about the Western civilization.
Yeah.
When you came to the Middle East, and you were talking about them dividing and conquering.
Yeah.
The question is, where did they come from? What is their origin of thinking that way? Did they have their own conclaves, states, or did they simply, this is my question in a way, did they simply try to make the current status there into their own image?
Yes. No, that's a very good question, and it's definitely coming up in the presentation. I'm going to start with like Napoleon Bonaparte, because this is where we really see the European colonial campaign starting. This question will definitely be answered.
I'm no apologist for the European nationalism and colonialism. Why would you differentiate that from the Ottoman Empire?
Because I'm talking about the European colonial project for this lecture. Does that answer your question?
We allow the lecturer to finish
Yeah.
the lecture, and then we can take notes if you want to and ask questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Oh, I think it's frozen. What's doing? Okay. Okay, let's start here since a lot of people have been asking about that. Have we ever seen this painting before? Do you know who's that? Yes. Do you know who's this? I believe, yes, the Sphinx. So Napoleon's invasion of Egypt was really the start of the European colonial project in the region. If you want a little bit of background of why he kind of led this expedition into Egypt, it was the French Revolution. The French Revolution really came out of the European nationalist movement. The European nationalist movement created the nation states that we have right now. But the thing about the French Revolution, it was so bloody and violent, and it went on and on and on, and they kept executing all of the elites. They could not really stop the revolution even when Napoleon Bonaparte took power. So his answer was to kind of calm down the revolutionary spirit in Europe, was to channel it into a colonial expedition. They're saying, oh, all of these young people are revolting and we don't know what to do about them, and they keep like hanging all of the elite, right? What are we gonna do, right? Let's gather this energy, put them in an army and tell them, let's teach the world about our great nation and our great civilization and civilize them, right? Does that answer your question a little bit? Okay. So from 1886 at the New York Times, someone reviewed this painting and wrote, the young Corsican, by the way, Napoleon Bonaparte is not even French, he's Corsican, which, I mean, the history of Europe we cannot really go into right now, but it's definitely, there is nothing called France, right? The Franks are Germanic tribes. So France is named after Germanic tribes. The indigenous people of France called the Gauls, right? So even the nation states that we take as granted as primordial and eternal, they're also very made up through ethnic and culture changes and other invasion from Germanic tribes to Latin tribes and vice versa. So he was seated on his horse, gazing in meditation upon the enormous enigmatic face of stone, that strange memorial of titanic ambitions, of a forgotten sovereigns, of a vanished race. What race is he talking about? Who is he talking about here? The Egyptians, yeah. But for some reason, in the European mind, it doesn't add up that brown people build this stuff. That's why you get all of the alien theories. It's racist, I have to say. Because for people who came here to civilize the nation and then saw things that they have never been able to build before, they were astonished. Even during the Crusades, by the way. I mean, and there's a lot of literature about how the Crusaders went back with philosophy from the Arab and Muslim world that really kind of was funneled into the Renaissance, right? So even when we think about European Renaissance, it's not just a European thing. It's, again, a historical, continuous project. But for some reason, when he arrived to Egypt, I mean, if the painting moved the other way, they're going to have like now McDonald's and Pizza Hut and everything. I don't know if you've ever been to Cairo, but at that point in 1886, there were millions of Egyptians living in Egypt. So the idea of a vanished race was so mind-boggling to me, right? It really reminds me of like people without a land and a land without people, right? It's the same narrative that's being kind of used against Palestinians right now, that has been used against us for so long. And it's so enrageous to think about this, right? So yeah, this was kind of their mentality coming in. There's no one here, just few peasants, or what they call they have a lot of like derogatory terms. And we're here to like civilize you while you also don't exist, so. The school of thought that gave birth to European nationalism is social Darwinism, and this is where we're really going anthropologically deep a little bit. Have we heard about social Darwinism before? Okay. So the idea is that Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection can be applied to social, political, and economic issues. It suggests that social progress depends on the survival of the fittest. It argues that governments and charities should not interfere with society because it would enable the weak to survive. This is where we get white supremacy. This is what we get, how we get laissez-faire capitalism. Because of this understanding of this very ugly chart, I'm sorry, but I had to include it because this was legit in science books. This was science, right? So the idea of how racial, and I'm an anthropologist, we are definitely part of this crime of aiding and enabling social Darwinism. And I'm going to show you some pictures that I personally took from the anthropological archives in College Park. If you are an anthropology buff, this is a great place. This is my Disneyland. You can go like see original notes of like old anthropologists and stuff like that. And I was working as a research assistant for a professor working on modern biometrics and how they're rooted in old scientific anthropology. That was an arm of colonization. So this is a picture I personally took from the archive of anthropologists measuring Native American skulls against animals, just to prove that they are racially inferior. Like Edward Bennett Taylor, Lewis Henry Morgan, and these are very big names in anthropology and social sciences. And they used to engage in this, which a lot of people believe kind of gave way to modern biometrics that like migrants have to go through on the borders, and the technology to verify facial recognition and all of that is based in anthropomorphic experiences. So those theories kind of portrayed non-Westernized society as primitive or exotic, depicting the customs of indigenous peoples as relics of an earlier stage of cultural evolution. And this is also a picture I took while they were playing with the skulls. I'm sorry, I know these are very disturbing, but I felt like it's important to see, to remind ourselves that this was considered science. So another main reason of the colonial expedition, other than social Darwinism and the idea of national and white supremacy, was also oil. I'm sure that it comes at no surprise to any of you. But something very important happened in the 18th century in this place, or actually a tiny town in this, I think it's attached to this county, called Oil Creek, Pennsylvania, where oil was first discovered in America. And the British were really nervous about this. The British were really nervous about Americans finding oil, because it was about to like fuel economic progress and kind of like give supremacy to the Americans in relation to the British Empire. So the British were like, we need to find some oil. What are we going to do? They did a very interesting thing. They looked at history books. And they realized that in the 11th and 12th century, Baghdad, Cairo, and Damascus had street lighting. So if you look from space in the 11th and 12th century, you can see Baghdad, Cairo, and Damascus, and that's it. Because oil was so abundant in the airplane that people would stomp into puddles of oil. Or if you see like a black stone, a porous stone on the ground, you know there's an oil well there. So when the British read in the history books that some of the crusaders saw this, they're like, oh, so here's the oil, right? So the oil lamp from Aladdin is not something that's just Disney made up. It's an actual motivation of the entire colonial expedition, specifically of the French and the British in the region in modern times. Street lighting might seem like a product of modernity, but there is little new about it. The Romans illuminated their city street at night, and Islamic cities from Baghdad to Cordoba were also lit when most of Europe was living in terms of street lighting, the so-called Dark Ages. A simple piece of street furniture showed it all. And the British were really smart about doing that. Like when they looked at the history book, they're like, okay, we need to go to the Arab world. This is where we get the needed oil to compete with the American Industrial Revolution. Another connection a lot of people don't know about the British expedition is that when the Civil War happened in here, there was something very important happening in the South, which is cotton plantation, right? Where was this cotton going? Huh? Yeah, to the British textile industry, right? It was a needed force to sustain the British textile industry, which is one of the main tenets of the British economy. So when the Civil War happened here, and also enslaved people starting to free themselves and fight to end slavery and abolition, the supply of cottons from the South stopped. So what did the British do? They went to Egypt. They turned it into a cotton plantation, basically, to replace the American South. And we never really think about these connections because we have been robbed of our history. All of us, Westerners and Easterners, we don't know that what enslaved Americans were enduring in the South was also similarly endured by peasants in the Nile Valley in Egypt. Maybe they did not have a legal slavery framework, but it was pretty much very close, unfortunately. And that's why what we're talking about is very important, because these colonial dynamics always come back home. I mean, they were here initially, but even with the American Empire kind of treat people, non-American people, in ways that eventually came home, and we're seeing the authoritarian rise right now. I can give you a minute if you want to read this part, just to give you, let me try to zoom in. Okay, I can't. So basically, this book called Egyptian Cotton and the American Civil War is a very, it's an article in the Political Science Quarterly. It really is a great source to understand these connections of colonial dynamics. Okay. So, just before World War I, this is what Africa and the Arab world looked like. Starting with the scramble over Africa, and then coming into the Great Arab Revolt. We're going to talk about the Great Arab Revolt 1916 a little bit, because I know World War I is not something that a lot of people know about, but it's really crucial to understanding the current geopolitical realities in the Arab world. But as you can see, they cut it up into different zones of British and French mainly, but also some Italian, some Spanish. Who is missing from the great nations of the European world from this map? Germany. And the Dutch, yeah. But I mean, at that point, Germany was kind of more encompassing. Huh? Belgium. No, we're going to come to Belgium. They were there. Portugal, yes. Yes. They were not. Yeah, I think they kind of took parts of Morocco for a while, and the Western Sahara as well, but they did not have a big share. But Germany specifically, because of the rivalry between the new nation states in England, in France, and Germany was so butthurt about not having their shares from the African and Arab land, which paves the way to World War I, the Germans coming in to claim their ancestral rights of other people's lands. So the scramble over Africa started with the establishment of the International Association of the Congo, a private organization established by King Leopold II of Belgium. The association initially states goals of scientific exploration and civilizing the African continent were largely a cover for King Leopold's ruthless pursuit of wealth and power in the Congo Basin, resulting in one of the most tragic and brutal periods in African colonial history. And you have to know that King Leopold was so special because he did not even want to colonize it as a Belgian king. The Congo was his private property. Like in his name, not even in Belgium's name. It was his private property. This is the Berlin Conference, 1884, where they basically sat around the table splitting Africa like a piece of cake between them, which also we're going to talk about Sykes-Picot from the Western Asian side of the Arab world, but at least the North African side was part of this infamous meeting in 1884, where European leaders were like cutting their cake. I'm showing you some of the caricatures from the era, just to give you the feel, right, of how they felt coming into Africa, like just stepping over it. You see, I mean, this is not Hitler, but he looks quite like Hitler. I mean, it's and you can see under his, between his foot is the African continent. So let's talk about European colonization of North Africa for a little bit. So mainly France took Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco. Britain took Egypt, Sudan, and also kind of joined Anglo-Egyptian rule of Sudan. So Egyptians were kind of colonizing Sudan within the British army. The motives was strategic control, specifically the Suez Canal of Egypt because of the commercial routes. You have to understand that the biggest piece of property that the British had was India. And securing the commercial routes to India and also the routes to extract from and through India went through the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was built through enforced, enslaved Egyptians. They worked for free. They dug the Canal of Suez for free in an enslavement type of labor. I would say 25% of the labor force died in the Suez Canal building it. And then for some reason it was owned by the French and the British. Also, of course, resource extraction, we talked about that, oil, minerals, agriculture, like cotton. The spread of civilizing mission to justify domination, geopolitical rivalry among European powers, of course we know. The impact was catastrophic. Displacement, but also resistance. I don't know if we're going to get to the resistance movement part because I think this is a very long lecture, but I also want to know that one of the main things that came out of the colonial project was also the resistance movement. We're going to talk more about that later on. And also colonial borders. They created lasting regional tensions, sectarian, religious. They really set up the stage to every civil war that we had since the late 1900s until now. It's still the same type of narrative. The British used to come and say, oh, we're here to save the Christians, right? Now we see the Israelis going into Syria and saying, oh, we're here to save the Druze. It's the exact same colonial logic that we're still operating under to this day. French settlers, colonists in Algeria were called les pieds noirs, people who are born as settlers in Algeria. People kind of forget that Algeria was a settler colony for 130 years by the French. So settler colonialism, it does go away. 130 years, and the Algerians fought and liberated their land and took back their land. So hopefully this will happen in Palestine as well. The invasion of Algeria was so funny in a tragic way because it started with the fly whisk incident in 1827. I don't know if anyone heard about the fly whisk incident. It's just how funny Europeans are when they want to like justify something. It's always interesting. So there was a long-standing financial dispute between France and Algeria because a couple of Algerian Jewish merchants lent France a lot of money. And the Algerian ruler at that point wanted the money back from Algeria. And they kept fighting back and forth of the French saying, no, we don't owe you anything. And the Algerian was like, no, you owe us money, you need to pay your dues. So Hussein Bey, the Ottoman governor of Algiers, continuously demanded repayment but was ignored. On April 29, 1827, during a meeting, Hussein Bey struck the French consul Pierre Duval with a fly whisk. And that was the reason they invaded Algeria. I know. So they started with a blockade that failed, leading to the full-scale French invasion of Algeria in 1830. This marked the beginning of over 130 years of French colonial rule in Algeria. This incident is so often cited as an example of the cultural and psychological dimension of colonization, where even seemingly small acts were imbued with messages of domination and disrespect. This was not a violent, you know what a fly whisk is, right? Like it's an ancient thing, it's like a, yeah, it's water, yeah, something like that. Exactly. But the idea that an Algerian man can dare and strike a European man was the offense. It was not the fly whisk. So, yeah. You don't have to read a lot about this, but this is the code of l'Indigénat, or the native code that established the apartheid state in Algeria, which is very similar to what we see right now in the apartheid state of Israel. We have forced labor, special taxes for Algerians, segregation, restricted freedom of mobility, public gatherings, political activity were banned. Algerians need permits to travel across their own land. Collective punishment, how familiar does this sound? Scorched earth tactics. There's a book of domination they all have and they all execute across the time. Summary punishment, fines and imprisonment without trial for minor offenses. Some of these offenses were like not showing respect to French officials. That was punishable by law in settler colonial Algeria. Public executions, economic exploitation, land seizure, very textbook what's happening in the West Bank right now. So this was 1880 Africa, this was 1913 Africa. This is a diverse mosaic of ethnic, linguistic, religious, historical traditions. And now we see basically UK, France, Portugal, Spain, Italy, German Empire, Belgium. One of the few spots that was never really colonized with Ethiopia, and also Liberia to a certain extent. But just to show you how the project of colonization was about homogenization, was about forcing people out of their culture tradition, severing the ties with our ancestral knowledge, right? And the borders that they drew had little to no regard to the ethnic and linguistic and historical traditions of Africa. Let's talk about the West Asian part of the Arab world and how it was colonized. So World War I find it very interesting to us. Do we know who was fighting who in World War I? It's usually very obscure. We all know World War II, but World War I is almost kind of obscure, right? Okay, so it was the Germans upset about not getting enough land, basically. So they started World War I. So it was fought between Britain, France, Russia on one side at the beginning. The Bolshevik revolution in Russia happened in the middle, so Russia kind of got out from the alliance. And later joined by the US. And the Central Powers, which is Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Ottoman Empire. And by that time, Ottoman Empire was really weakened. Corruption, a lot of different things is happening. Just to prove my point about the East-West fictional binary, the Ottoman Empire at this point in history books was referred to as the sick man of Europe. The sick man of Europe. Just to once the colonization happened, suddenly the Ottoman Empire is not Europe anymore, and it's not the West anymore. It's kind of separated historically through manufacturing consent. So, of course, it was sparked by the assassination of Franz Ferdinand by a certain nationalist, which triggered a chain of alliances and defense pacts, pulling many nations into a war. The Ottoman Empire played a key role in the Middle Eastern theater of war, aligning with Germany to regain power. Germany was not Nazi at this point. Germany became Nazi because of this defeat. Led by Enver Pasha, Turkish nationalists joined the Central Powers to reclaim lost Ottoman territories. But the thing about World War I that was really new is that we had massive ability to destroy. We have new technological advancements of weapons. Humans were never able to cause so much destruction before World War I. So World War I, where we see really those new European technologies, machine guns, poison gas, tanks, aircraft, submarines were used on a mass scale unprecedented in history. No human had the ability to destroy entire nations before like that. Of course, there were wars, but nobody had the technological ability to annihilate another people. So, anyone heard about the Arab Revolt, 1916? Okay, it's a very obscure part of history on purpose. So, I mean, the Arab Revolt is a very controversial topic. Some Arabs think of it as a huge treason, some others think of it as a huge pride, so it is a controversial topic. So a military uprising by Arab forces, mainly led by Sharif Hussein of Mecca. He was the grand imam of Mecca at that point, coming from a lineage from Muhammad, the Islamic prophet. So Sharif Hussein of Mecca led an Arab forces alliances against the Ottoman Empire during World War I. So what the British were really good at is to, if they want to like tackle the Ottoman Empire, they go into like the separatist minority movement within the Ottoman Empire, give them a lot of money, tell them work with us, and we're going to reward you with an independent Arab state. That never happened. So the motivation behind the revolt was a desire for independence. A lot of Arab nationalism was growing at that point. And a lot of Arabs sought freedom from Ottoman control and wanted to establish a united Arab state. Also, the growing sense of shared Arab identity, culture, and language. The British promised, through the Hussein McMahon correspondences, you can find them at the Library of Congress if you want to actually see a picture of those correspondences. Britain promised to support Arab independence if they revolted against the Ottomans. I know. So a lot of Arabs felt politically and economically marginalized under Ottoman centralized power. We have to say that. It's historically accurate. So Britain kind of picked up on that and used it, right? So they provided weapons, money, and advisors. T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. Anyone seen that movie? Yeah, this is where he comes in. He was an anthropologist, by the way. I'm not very proud of that, but he was. So Lawrence of Arabia came in as kind of a mediator, a cultural mediator between the British colonial governors and the Arab revolutionaries, supplying them with military expertise, weapons, money, funding, and also negotiating with the British on behalf of the Arabs sometimes. That's why there's a movie, because he was like kind of a butt of a joke that he went native. Like he really sympathized with the natives, and they were making jokes about him being a native sympathizer. The outcome, of course, the revolt weakened the Ottoman control, but ended in betrayal, which is Sykes-Picot. We're going to talk about Sykes-Picot now, which is a secret agreement. It's one of the most infamous diplomatic secret affairs of the last century. And it sparked long-term Arab distrust of Western powers. So what Bernard Lewis has been talking about the angry Arab, and they really don't tell you why Arabs are angry, that's why. Because they were betrayed, right? So, during the war, Sharif Hussein bin Ali of Mecca, leader of the Hashemite family, he is the ancestor of the current king of Jordan, launched a revolt against the Ottoman Caliphate. Hussein positioned himself as a rival to the Ottoman Sultan Khalifa, claiming religious and political legitimacy as custodian of the holy cities of Mecca. So the British were trying to mobilize Muslims and Arabs against the Ottoman Empire, but their problem was the Ottoman Empire held the religious legitimacy, right? The Ottoman Khalifa was the highest, was the Pope, basically, right? So how they counter that effect by mobilize Arabs with them? They went and picked up another religious leader from the governor of the holiest city in Islam, which is Mecca. He comes from the Prophet's family, which gives him a lot of legitimacy, and used him as a weapon to mobilize Muslims and Arabs with the British. If you look up Crescent Moon Camp, yeah, it's a fun thing to watch. So yeah, Britain promised, in return, the promise was a united Arab kingdom. A united Arab kingdom that encompassed the Levant, Mesopotamia, the Arabian Peninsula, down to Yemen. So the entire area was supposed to be the united Arab kingdom if the British, of course, delivered on their promise, which they really do. The only promise they made that time and they kept was the Balfour Declaration, and we're going to talk about this one. So the Hashemites saw an opportunity to replace Ottoman rule with a pan-Arab kingdom. Under their leadership, Britain supported the revolt with arms, funding, and officers like T.A. Lawrence. The revolt highlighted competing visions of Muslim leadership. The Ottoman Sultan claimed religious authority, Sharif Hussein claimed religious authority. The revolt contributed to the collapse of the Ottoman rule in Arabia and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire at large. But Arab hopes were betrayed. Britain and France secretly divided the Arab world under their colonial mandates. The Hashemites were given very limited rule. King Faisal tried to reclaim Damascus at some point, but the French bombarded him, like actually bombed Damascus to prevent the United Arab Kingdom from happening. This is King Faisal. This is Lawrence of Arabia. And this was at the Paris Conference of Peace. After World War I, this was kind of the concluding conference when Europeans sat together and to make peace to the world, to create a new world order, which produced the League of Nations, which kind of like later on became the United Nations. So they were writing about human rights and peace and cooperation, but Arabs were not allowed to come to the conference. Actually, the 1919 revolution of Saad Zaghloul in Egypt was to pressure the Britain to let Saad Zaghloul come to this conference and present the Egyptian case against the British. Also, King Faisal was really, like, part of the Egyptian revolution also was to pressure that King Faisal would be represented in the same meeting. So he is the son of Sharif Hussein, so if you all don't know. So, Battle of Megiddo 1918 was the end of the defeat of the Ottoman, triggering their surrender. The Ottoman Empire was dissolved, divided between the Allied powers, laying the groundwork for the modern Middle East. The Treaty of Versailles imposed really harsh terms on the Germans, which kind of also paved the way for the Nazification of Germany. But it also gave us the rise of two anti-colonial movements that still shapes the Arab world until now: Arab nationalism and pan-Islamism. So think about anti-colonial movement as people asking themselves, Arabs were really asking themselves, what happened? How we were colonized like that? How did we get dispossessed like that? It was such a people don't really think about the psychological impact of colonization. You can do a lot of things, but one of them is internalize the inferiority and the superiority claim of Europeans. So some people maybe said, oh, maybe we are really not civilized. Maybe we really deserve what happened. Some others said, no, we do not deserve what happened. This is a dispossession campaign. We need to resist. But we need to resist, we need to build a movement, something to unify people. So there were two logics to unifying people. One is that these are Europeans and we're Arabs. This is where Arab nationalism comes from. The other question was, no, these are Christians and we're Muslims. And this is when pan-Islamism comes from, right? So these are different strategies of people resisting the same thing or reckoning with the question of how did this happen to us, right? The pan-Islamist movement was, the answer was, maybe we really strayed away from Islam, and if we go back to the purified version of Islam, maybe God will stop this, nightmare. And this is basically where we get political Islam. So the disillusionment with Western imperialism and the betrayal of Arab aspirations set the stage for anti-colonial movements in the Arab world for decades to come. By World War II and the decolonization period, Islamist movements really gained momentum, particularly in response to the failure of secular nationalist government to secure decolonization. Because again, I mean, that's a different era, maybe we can talk about it in other maybe future lectures, but Arab nationalism was really dismantled. Secular resistance was really dismantled in a lot of different ways, using CIA money and a lot of different things. We can talk about this later. But the failure of Arab nationalists, and also some of them allying themselves with the Western colonial power, made people lose trust in Arab nationalists and secular leaders. So it really pushed a lot of people into radical political ideologies like political Islam. Yes? Yes, Arab nationalism was a very secular movement, yes. It was actually started by mainly Christian Arabs in the Levant.
But they would have their own religion, and it's just that religion wasn't what...
Yeah, religion was not the platform of the movement. It was the nationality. It was the nation cause. But for pan-Islamism, Islam was the shared identity. So that's why pan-Islamism also included Pakistan, for example, Afghanistan, nations that were not Arabs ethnically or even linguistically. But Arab nationalism only focused on the North Africa, West Asia part of the Arab-speaking world. So Islamist thinkers like Sayyid Qutb, who became a leading figure in the Muslim Brotherhood advocating for an Islamic state, argued that many Muslim countries were living in a state of jahiliyyah, or pre-Islamic ignorance. I mean, definitely it's a very historically controversial concept, but this is how they thought of it. They thought of like pre-Islam, we were living in ignorance, and now we strayed away from that, and we need to go back to pure Islam. And by the way, this movement comes back with every invasion. When the Mongol invaded the region, we had a traditionalist Islamic doctrine coming up. It is a very, like whenever you're in a crisis or an invasion, the traditionalists kind of like come to the forward to the front of the political sphere, because they have a very rigid narrative that can unify people. Sometimes to unify people, you need something that's like, kind of gives them structure. Okay, what time is it? Are we okay?
I think we have probably another 10 minutes of your conversation, and then we'll have another 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So, yeah, very quickly recap, we had the Arab Revolt 1916, followed by Sykes-Picot Agreement 1916 as well, and the Balfour Declaration 1917. We're going to go more in details about these. So, this is actually an actual picture of the Sykes-Picot map that the Sykes and Picot drew. Well, I heard they were drunk as well, but I'm not sure. A secret treaty made between France and Britain during World War I to divide Ottoman Empire territories. So while they were telling the Arabs, go to war and we're going to give you a united Arab kingdom, they already signed this agreement in secrecy between them, right? And that's why when they say, oh, you guys are angry Arabs, I'm like, yeah, we are angry for a reason. I don't deny. Like, I am angry. It was signed in May 1916 between French diplomat François-Georges Picot and British diplomat Mark Sykes. The agreement defined proposed spheres of influence and control in the Middle East if the Triple Entente, which is the British, France, and Russia, succeeded in defeating the Ottoman Empire in World War I. Under the agreement, France would control Syria, Lebanon, and northern Iraq, and southeast Turkey. Britain would control central and southern Iraq, Jordan, Palestine, and parts of in northern Iraq. You know why Iraq was split between them? Oil. They were fighting over oil. Go ahead.
Can you quickly explain ports in northern Iraq? Is that how the ports I know are in southern Iraq?
Yeah, but ports in south and northern Iraq, what do you mean? Explain like the names?
Well, I mean, what body of water?
Oh, the Gulf, the Arab Gulf or the Persian Gulf, depends on what you want to say, and also, yeah.
South Iraq.
Yeah, I mean, you want me to look it up? I honestly don't know but I think it also had to do with like drilling as well and petroleum. Russia was set to control eastern Turkey, including Istanbul and the Turkish Straits. But what happened in Russia is that 1917 they had the communist Bolshevik revolution, and they kind of like stepped back and said, no, we don't want to take part of any imperial campaigns anymore. We don't want to control Turkey, and they kind of pulled back from the alliance. So this was the map as they drew it, the direct French control, so there was like ABC, kind of like very West Bank style division of like some under direct French control, some had French influence, very different terminologies to the same thing. They had like, they said we're not colonizing the Arab world, we're putting it under a mandate. Because for them also Arabs were kind of like a little bit more civilized than Africans in their like supremacist hierarchy. So they were like, no, we're not going to colonize you, we're going to put you under a mandate system. When you hear mandate Palestine, that's what mandate Palestine means. It was under supervision of our elders in Europe because we were children and we couldn't have self-determination. No, that's literally what they used to say. I'm not even kidding. This is written in political communication that you guys cannot really have self-determination until we civilize you a little bit. So definitely Sykes-Picot is seen as a classic example of secret colonial diplomacy that betrayed the principle of national self-determination. Pre-Sykes-Picot map were unified Ottoman Empire across the 3 continents with diverse provinces. Provinces like Egypt and Arabia had some autonomy under the Ottoman rule. But also there was a rich ethnic and religious diversity. Arabs, Kurds, Armenians, Turks, Jews, Christians, everyone lived together. I'm not saying there were not problems. Of course, there were tensions across history, but it was never at the level that we have seen after the colonial project. The post-Sykes-Picot map, the Ottoman men divided into British and French mandate, forming new states, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine. Artificial borders ignored local identities, fueling future ethnic and sectarian conflicts, marked start of colonial rule despite promises of Arab independence, and led to deep Arab disillusionment and calls for unity and self-rule.
Sorry, one question. On the previous map, you had what is now known as Palestine under a international zone.
Yes.
It wasn't under British mandate.
It was under British mandate.
You never were told
Yeah.
what existed, but what does that mean, international zone?
Because the Balfour Declaration was already in motion, so they were paving the way for the state of Israel. That's why they didn't want to claim it as their territory. So, yeah, which gets me to the Balfour Declaration. So, of course, there is a history of anti-Semitism in Europe. Anti-Semitism is uniquely a European phenomenon. That's why it's called anti-Semitism, because it's anti-Semitic people, and I would like to remind you that Arab peoples are also mostly Semitic people. So decades and centuries of discrimination, of persecution against European Jews, culminating itself into the Holocaust in the World War I, but even before that, Jewish population in Europe have been going through really bad treatment And I'm not saying there were not tensions in the Arab world, but European, Arab and Middle Eastern, North African Jews have been living in the region for thousands of years. So sometimes we're not immune to propaganda. We think that Jewish people did not exist in the Middle East or in the Arab world before the State of Israel. That's actually not true. They actually were uprooted from their historical communities in North Africa and the Arab world because of the State of Israel. So in the background of pogroms and persecution against Jewish people in Europe, Britain was trying to get the Americans and the Russians to sympathize and join World War I to tackle Germany and the Ottoman Empire. And they thought adopting the Zionist claim over Palestine is going to gain them sympathy from Christian Zionists and also Jewish Zionists in the world. But as you said, Andy, Christian Zionism played a much bigger role in building the Zionist movement than Jewish groups. Actually, Christian Zionists were pushing Zionism on a lot of Jewish people, and a lot of Jewish people resisted Zionism for so long. So Britain, in a diplomatic move, Britain said, okay, if we honor the Zionist movement and give them Palestine, maybe America will help us in tackling Germany and the Ottoman Empire. So the Balfour Declaration was a statement by the British government during World War I on November 2nd, 1917. It was named after Arthur Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary at the time. The declaration expressed British support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The key elements of the Balfour Declaration included that the British government officially endorsed the idea of establishing a homeland for Jewish people in Palestine. The declaration also emphasized that the support for a Jewish homeland should not really touch the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. That was embedded in the Balfour Declaration, right? Which primarily consisted of Arab Palestinians, of course. It was made clear that the establishment of this national home would be contingent on the development of self-governing institutions and the cooperation of the local population, which of course never happened, as we all know. The Balfour Declaration had a significant impact on the geopolitical landscape in the Middle East until this moment. All the wars that we're in right now has its roots in this declaration and the Sykes-Picot Agreement. That's why World War I context is very important for us to understand the current geopolitical realities in our region and also in the world. It laid the groundwork for the eventual establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 and tensions and conflicts between Jewish and Muslim and Christian communities in the region, which continue to affect the region until this day.
I think it's important to note that Palestine wasn't the initial place that they were trying to put.
True. There's Uganda, there's places in Latin America as well. Yeah.
And also, it's important to acknowledge that in the Balfour Declaration, they label it as non-Jewish communities specifically, and they don't identify it as the Palestinian communities.
Yeah.
And that can't be overlooked.
Yeah, there's actually an evangelical American commission that went around the land to kind of survey the people living there to make a decision whether they're going to support the declaration or not. And if you read the report, it's honestly it's really weird because they came back and said, oh, no, these are just peasants. It's okay, you can take the land. And it was just like, it's a very, yeah, they didn't call them Palestinians, they just called them Arab peasants. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, you cannot dispossess people to that extent without dehumanizing them. If you think they're equal to you, you will not be able most probably to at least rally people around an expedition of colonization and dispossession. Okay, so there's actually a documentary Al Jazeera about Christian Zionism. If you guys are interested, it's called Waiting for Armageddon, how Christian evangelical beliefs affect foreign policy in the Middle East. But of course, a lot of American Zionists played a huge role in kind of facilitating the colonization of Palestine in the name of religion. And it also, because sometimes we only think about religion and politics when we think about the Arab region, but we never think about religion and politics here. right? And I talk a lot about that in my class, that we have to understand that when Bush invaded Afghanistan, he called it a crusade. There's a video of him saying this is a new crusade. So yes, Arabs and Muslims have used Islam and religion for political reasons, but also in response to the weaponization of the Judeo-Christian tradition against Muslims. Which is also crazy because the Judeo-Christian tradition comes from the region, right? So how come it got weaponized against us is mind-boggling. Arabs, Palestinians have nothing to do with the Holocaust whatsoever. I actually just heard someone saying that in Netanyahu's book, he says that the Palestinians were the people who convinced Hitler to do the Holocaust, which is, well, large, I think. So yeah, this was a war strategy, basically, Balfour Declaration, to win Jewish support in the US, Russia, and beyond, to weaken the Ottomans and shape post-war control. This countered growing German and French influence in the Middle East, securing Palestine for strategic control as well, specifically the Canal of Suez, and responding to the lobbying of Zionist groups around the world. Okay. Should we go into, oh, by the way, do you know how we found out about Psychos-Pico? Anyone? Yeah, when the Russian communists came to power, they found it and they published it. That's how we know. Yeah, they're like, oh, we were about to sign this colonial document. Look at what happened. And this is how the Arabs found out about Psychos-Pico, from the Russian communists. Isn't this wild? Okay. I don't know, should I go into the resistance movement or should we stop here?
It might be a good idea to stop here.
Okay.
So that people have time to ask questions.
Okay.
We really do need to wrap up by
I know it's a lot.
11:15.
Okay. Let's do questions. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I wanted to ask you quickly, you give this lecture in your school?
Broken down many, yeah.
Have you had any pushback?
Oh my God, a lot. Yeah, I feel like, I don't know if I know, I don't know how to talk about this because I love my students and I respect their backgrounds and their grievances and all of that, and I feel like personally committed to educate them and give them critical thinking and critical history, but it also has been really hard. Especially, I was hired to teach that class. I teach Intro to the Arab World class, so it's an undergrad class. It's very generic. I talk about colonial history, national liberation movement, and then I go into the state formation, the process of state formation, and then the neoliberal crisis in the Arab world with the World Bank and IMF, and then I go into the Arab Spring, and then I talk about popular culture. I talk about gender relations, queer politics in the Arab world. Like, I talk about all of this because it's an intro book. But the beginning is like that, which 80% of the students are okay. I usually have like the 10 to 20% every semester that really pushes back at me, especially as a woman of color as well. It's not easy for students to take me seriously. Sometimes I have to like kind of try to mitigate all of these questions, but then added Zionist beliefs to this mix. And I was hired to teach the first iteration of this class in fall 2023. So October 7 happened in the middle of the class. And I maintain my narrative. I refuse to, I give them an entire lecture about the genealogy of the concept of terrorism. We can do that as well, like tracing it back to the French Revolution, then the Russian Revolution, and all of that. So I maintain my narrative, but I get a lot of resistance. One of my students lost 2 of his friends in the music festival on October 7. And that was one of the hardest things I had to navigate as an Arab woman myself who is maintaining a pro-resistance narrative, and I choose to maintain it until now. The chair of our department is Palestinian. And she was like, listen, the only thing I'm going to tell you, if you are fired, that means I was already fired. I was like, okay, I'll take it. What else can we do at this point? But I also witnessed a lot of transformations. Like I had many Israeli students that came and like really transformed their view on the Arab world. They, because I also go into Nakba denialism and Exodus and all of these stuff. So yeah, a lot of resistance, but also a lot of like conversions, which is not a bad thing. Thank you. Go ahead.
So I was just say, first of all, thank you very much for this informative lecture. I mean, this, like you said, this is like a course, like a real. I mean, you could spend, many, many hours on these topics. Hundreds of years or thousands of years of history in various countries and so forth. My question, I mean, you mentioned, I think during World War I, the idea of a united Arab state, or I think kingdom. I don't know if that would work so well today, but do you envision something like that happening in the foreseeable future? Could there be again, maybe it sounds like a dream or a fantasy or something like that, but can you envision a united Arab state in the Middle East in the future?
I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, the only way to answer that question is to look at history, because unfortunately I don't know the future. But Arab nationalism kind of really gained momentum again in the early 50s and 60s under Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt and Hughes Khan and Michel Aflaq as well in Levant. But Nasser kind of grew that movement, which we didn't have time to talk about it, but it's called the non-alignment movement. Yeah. Yeah, this one. So there was a budding non-alignment movement, and this is, by the way, where the third world comes from. It's not like this underdeveloped world. The third world was a self-chosen term to describe that the people who did not align with the East or the West during the Cold War. So they did not align with the Soviets nor the Americans, and this is where we get the third world terminology from. So Arab nationalism had its moment in the 50s and the 60s, and it was crushed by the 1967 defeat. The 1967 defeat is something that I also write extensively about in my own dissertation, as a moment where the entire non-alignment anti-colonial movement was crushed. Crushed in a level that, I don't know the other generations from the Arab world, but we all live with this pain until now, where all the Arab armies were, the Egyptian entire air defense system was crushed in a few hours by the Israelis. It was on the ground, yeah. Yeah, no. I don't think that's how people felt at that point, retrospectively, because there was like this hope and momentum behind Arab nationalism, and you're saying, we're going to take the land back, we're going to free Palestine, and Abdel Nasser building alliances with Nehru and Castro and Sukarno and all of these like third world leaders. And then came 1967 that crushed Abdel Nasser to the extent that he resigned from the presidency, and the Egyptian people had to take the street to bring him back. So what I'm saying is that there is a specific trauma around Arab nationalism and hope in the Arab world. I would say we are coming out of it now as we're seeing the world rally behind Palestinians. I would have to say that. I have personally seen a lot of different attitudes towards the West in the Arab world now, that because there was this also question like, where is the West? Why is no one knowing what's happening to us and stopping it by in any way, right? Yeah. So people who are really, especially my parents' generation, when I'm the Arab Spring generation. I was an Arab Spring protester and organizer. That's why I'm here. And I escaped the dictatorship to come to another one. I hope that whatever. I think it's me. I think I'm the problem. So the Arab Spring generation, my generation, I would say millennials and after that, now there is a hope of reformulating the Arab national dream, but I don't think that nationalism per se is a governing framework for us right now. It's more of a globalist kind of the marginalized, or as Frantz Fanon called them, the wretched of the earth kind of coalition. So I would see something happening in the Arab world, but I wouldn't say if it would be like a national framework or something bigger than that. So I don't know, but I feel like there is definitely revolutionary energy in the area right now brewing, especially when we go into state formation. We know that our elite kind of sold us to colonial powers. In my dissertation, I call it subcontracted authoritarianism. So with the turn to the neoliberal strategy, Egypt, for example, is an example of someone who really listened to America and everything. They stepped outside of the Palestinian resistance camp. They signed the Camp David Accord. They turned to neoliberalism from socialism. They privatized everything. And now Egypt is talking about an economy of war. So we went through the entire experience. We chose peace, and we still ended up in war.
government is justified and Western countries supporting these authoritarian governments in the name of these people cannot rule themselves. At the time of the Arab Spring also, many Western countries didn't support, though they are promoting democracy means as a idea, but still they didn't support this revolt or Arab uprising or Arab Spring, whatever we call. Then I think that narration, the Arab people or the people of that region cannot rule themselves, is still going on and still used as a weapon or a tactic to support authoritarian government, to prevent their narration or to prevent their whole identity or self-determination. That is still going on. But when we also see at the time of the Arabs in that when they are trying to get these, when they are coming to street for their power, for identity, for their self-determination or for human rights, may Western media or others may call them as irrational or they are not uncivilized. They are a threat to stability of the nation. So they also use that as a reason. So they cannot be ruled. They should be ruled by an authoritarian government. They are not allowed for a self-determination or democracy. That is still going on, I think so.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great comment, honestly, and that's why I use the framework of subcontracted authoritarianism, because our nationalist ideologies that were made for self-determination and national liberation are used against us now by our own governments, right? Like this is, the neoliberal type of colonization or the financial colonization of this era really puts Arab leaders as subcontracted colonial governors using the same logics of domination. And this is the problem, that when we formed our states, we formed the states in the international framework of the United Nations. You cannot put a claim or like ask for a loan from the World Bank if you're not a nation state registered in the United Nations, right? So we had to scramble figuring out how to be nation states after colonization left. I mean, physically, I would say left. So we used the same colonial rules, the same colonial dynamics. We kind of reproduced them with a nationalistic tone, which ended up in dictatorships all around.
I think we have time for one more. Okay, sorry.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this very rich presentation. I had a question when we were looking at the history of the Arab world. Where was Iran in all of this? If you could just, I know this is such a huge question, but if you could just give like a 101 answer as it relates to like, you know, the Arab revolt and pre-World War I, because that's a very important context to understanding the Balfour Declaration. So if you could just give a 101 synthesized answer, or like look at this presentation or this reading. Yeah, that'd be really great.
I can answer that question in that time frame, but there is a great lecture by Roy Casagranda from the Austin School. Have you seen him? He's amazing. So he talks specifically about how Iran was going basically through the same, like they also capitulated on nationalist movements within Iran, installing a very pro-Western government initially, and then toppling, and then it was toppled by the Islamic Revolution. But also, Iran was one of the very early democracies in the region, and Syria as well. Syria had a democracy. Iraq was attempting in democracies, and there's a lot of literature on the CIA-funded coups in the region that kind of dismantled all of these democratic attempts, because a fact that maybe we didn't really say, but no democracy was allowed in the Middle East because there was a deep realization that if there is a government in place that represents its people, the state of Israel will cease to exist. Thank you. I can give it to you if you want. Yeah. Oh, okay. I know. We also had one question.
When Anne speaks, we all have to listen.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah. Well, first, on behalf of everyone, of course, tremendous lecture, and how do we sign up for your courses? Yeah, well, all right. Yay! Yeah. Well, great, and I live in Hawaii, so come on. Okay, well, what I wanted to mention, besides the thanks, is that Netanyahu is arriving today, and they're calling for a sound demo out by the White House this afternoon, if you can be there, and then all day tomorrow. He probably is leaving on Tuesday, so we've got lots more work to do after a great day of yesterday of everything. So, but again, many, many thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you for giving me the time. Thank you, Henry, for giving me the space. I'm very passionate about public academia. I don't want to be confined within the academy. I'm striving to build a career similar to other scholars that worked independently of the academy, and I think this is a great space. So thank you so much for allowing me this space, Andy, for reading.